Welcome to Secret Story, call now for instant relief, you'll just low. The rest of the advert was cut off as Sophie switched the TV off. Leaning her head back on the sofa, she sighed softly. Glancing at the clock on the wall, she noted that Josh was an hour late. He had gone on a business trip, an urgent contract. One that could make them rich, supposedly. She had not wanted to go, business trips were not her style. He had been gone a week already, and aside from missing him terribly. It had been 2 weeks since her illicit with Ben. She would have called him to help her out, but he was on holiday in Europe and he wouldn't be back till the end of the month, 2 more weeks away. Josh had phoned after the meeting had finished early in the afternoon and told her he had secured the contract and had told her to get all dressed up so that they could go out tonight. But of course, Josh wasn't back yet. This was why Sophie Harper was all dressed up. She was wearing a short black cocktail dress. She looked a knockout as always. Her long straight blonde hair hung down her back, her long white legs were shown off perfectly by the mid-thigh length of the dress. Her blue eyes looked even bigger than normal, emphasized by the mix of black and blonde. She had thought of seducing the next man who came by, even the paperboy. Just as she was thinking of a way she could find someone to tonight, the doorbell rang. She ran towards the door, smoothing her dress when she got there. She calmly opened the front door. Opening the front door, expecting to see Josh. Sophie had a bit of a shock, she hadn't expected to see the man staring back at her. Charles Riley was Josh's boss. A nice guy from all that she had heard about him. He gave money to charities and even ran homeless shelters around the city. A respected man and well-liked in the community. He wasn't one of these rich people who stuck their noses in the air or only mingled with other rich people. Charles Riley was as much at home with the homeless people as with the rich and famous. Everybody liked him, except Sophie. Now Sophie wasn't one to mind flirting with people, but Mr. Charles Riley was not the man of her dreams. Charles Riley was 56, gray hair on his balding head, a large nose. And was short and overweight. His suit looked ready to burst at the seams. And he stood there with a large smile on his face, obviously ogling at her body. "Mr. Riley. What can I do for you?" Sophie said, trying to hide the surprise in her voice. "Sophie. Looking good as always," he said with that stupid smile on his face. Sophie moved a little more behind the door. "Josh phoned me after the meeting this afternoon and told me he had got the contract. I was happy for him of course and asked him to come over for a drink, but he insisted that I come over here." "Is he in?" "No, he isn't back yet. He should have been an hour ago but he's not and he hasn't phoned yet." Sophie answered. "Ah. He said he might not be back, what with planes being as they are. He said if he wasn't to just wait for him, that you would take care of me." His smile deepened at the last words. "He never told me," Sophie said. "I suppose you had better come in." Sophie moved behind the door and let the old man in. There was no way she was going to walk in front of this guy and give him an excuse to view her. When he had entered, she shut the door behind her and followed him into the lounge. Riley sat down on the sofa opposite the chair. The table in between, the TV to the left and the other sofa opposite that. Sophie held her dress as she sat on the chair. She thought, "I'm old enough to be his daughter." They sat there for a couple of minutes in silence. Sophie looked everywhere else while Riley openly ogled her. "Fancy a drink?" Sophie asked, anything to get her out of there. "Yeah, sure," Riley replied. Sophie stood up and berated herself mentally for bending a little too far forward, then quickly walked into the kitchen. She opened the fridge and took out a beer. Popped the top off and brought it back through to the lounge, handing it to her boyfriend's boss. Riley held on to her hand as she handed him the bottle. Sophie pulled her hand away from his and moved back a little. Riley took a swig of the brew and placed it on the table in front of him. When he stood up, he was a little shorter than Sophie. Walking over to her slowly, she did not back away. This is my house, she thought. Riley stopped and offered his hand out to her. May I have one dance, please, Sophie? He asked all gentlemanly. Dance. Sophie stammered incredulously. Yes, just one dance, Riley replied smiling. Sophie was a little confused. Maybe he wasn't a sleazy guy after all. Just one, Sophie replied sternly. Riley took the young lady's hand. He gently pulled her to him. His plan might work, he thought to himself. He had planned to ask her to dance, accidentally fall onto the sofa and cop a feel as he did. It might just work. They danced a few steps, then a few more, a little turn, then some more. She was a good dancer, she must be good at everything, Riley thought. He turned her around, so her back was to him as they danced a little more. She was getting into this. Then he could feel the sofa he had been sitting on behind his foot and made his knee give way. He fell backwards onto the sofa, pulling the blonde. This was not how he had intended to fall. Sophie fell backwards onto the sofa with Riley. With the shock of the fall, Sophie just sat there while her mind cleared a little. I've got to get up, Sophie thought. But she didn't move at all. Charles Riley couldn't believe how that fall had worked out. He had fallen wrong, but this was so much better than he had expected. And what was even better was that she was not moving. Sophie thought of moving again, she wouldn't mind, but this was Charles Riley. But it felt too good to move. Now this seating arrangement is so much better, wouldn't you agree, Miss Harper? He asked. Yeah, she said before she could think. Sophie had completely forgotten that this was a guy she hated. You like my little game? Riley asked her. She nodded. What was she doing? She hated this guy, and he didn't turn her on at all. Then he stopped as the phone rang. Then the phone started to ring. In one way, she was glad, but in another, she wanted him to carry on. As she reached for the phone by the side of the sofa. It was a cordless phone and had a little LCD screen, which showed the caller's ID. The little screen read, Josh, which meant he was phoning from his mobile. Hello, she said. Hey honey, it's me, Josh replied. Hey baby, Sophie said, and Riley started, honey, the plane has landed, but I'm still waiting for a taxi. They say there has been some kind of accident on the road somewhere, and traffic is really bad. I don't know when I'll get home, could be in about half an hour or it could be a couple of hours, Josh explained. Oh baby, I miss you. I can't wait for you to come back, Sophie told Josh. You okay, baby? Josh asked worriedly. Yeah, I'm fine sweetie. Sophie's eyes were now closed. Her head turned towards her boyfriend's boss. She held the phone to her ear. Sweetie, I forgot to tell you that my boss is coming over for a drink, so he should be there soon. Can you keep him entertained till I get back? Josh asked nervously. He knew that Sophie didn't like his boss. Sophie broke the kiss. Yeah, I will, baby, she replied. Sophie looked down at the pudgy hands. I'm entertaining him right now, he seems to be enjoying himself, she told Josh. Good, I'm glad things are going okay. I'll be back there soon, sweetheart, Josh said. I can't wait to see you, baby, Sophie cooed down the phone. All the pleasure she was feeling was starting to get to her. She needed it now. Then a wicked idea came to her, and she almost came from just the thought. Baby, I have missed you so much this last week, will you stay on the phone with me for a while? Sophie asked in her best pouty voice. Sure baby. I have missed you loads too, Josh replied after a short laugh. Why, she said down the phone. I'll pass you on to your boss so you can speak to him for a while. I'm just gonna have a snack, I'll be back later. Okay, then, baby, Josh told her. Smiling at him, she handed him the phone, but as she gave him the phone with her boyfriend on the other end, Sophie whispered into the old man's other ear. I am going while you're on the phone to my boyfriend. And with that teasing smile she had perfected, she gave him the phone. She could hear him talking to Josh about how his girlfriend was entertaining him, and that she was very kind, and was really looking after him. Sophie was shocked by what she saw. He was even bigger than Ben was. Sophie looked up at the old man, who just smiled back at her, reaching for it. She wrapped one of her small, slim hands and was surprised when her fingers didn't meet. Looking up at Riley, she said, "Do you like that?" "It's very nice," he replied whilst looking at her. "Oh, Sophie is just showing me a picture of hers," Riley told Josh. Sophie smiled. As much for herself as for Riley. This was so kinky. Suddenly, Riley said, "Yeah, I'll put you on to her for a second." And with a smile for her, he handed the phone to her. She took it with her free hand. "Hey baby, what's up?" she asked her boyfriend of 3 years. "What picture is this he was talking about?" "You don't paint," Josh replied normally. Sophie had bowed her head after she finished speaking. "You remember that old one I did of the boat years ago?" she replied to his question. While she was doing this, her boyfriend said, "Oh yeah, now I remember, I thought you had thrown that away a while ago. I told you, you should never have stopped painting." "I know, maybe I'll take it up again," Sophie said. "Honey, I'll put you back on to Mr. Riley, I think my food is just about ready." The look on the old man's face said he couldn't take much more of it. She handed the phone back to Riley, who immediately said to Josh, "Your girl is really hand-wide, with a paintbrush." Sophie smiled at Riley. Sophie was more turned on than ever now. She was going he boyfriend's boss while he was on the phone to him. Keeping her eyes on her boyfriend's boss's now. Looking at the shock on her boyfriend's boss's eyes, she knew no one had ever been able to go this far down on him. "Oh, your girlfriend is really looking after me, Josh," the fat boss tried to say. He had never even dreamt that this would be happening. He spoke to Josh. "Yeah, she seems to be really enjoying that food. She must be quite a cook." He managed to keep his voice steady. "Yeah. She is." "What's she been making?" the unknowing boyfriend asked. "Something with sausage in it. But it must taste good, because she not only looks like she is enjoying it," the old boss answered. Riley smiled at this. Now he had a plan to make her his. "Yeah, she seems to like sausage dishes," Josh laughed. "She always wants them lately. Must be a phase or something." "Yeah, she is really enjoying this. This must be the best she has ever had," Riley said. "Here, listen to her eat it." Sophie almost came when Riley placed the phone by her ear. Josh could certainly hear her. She took her mouth from it and quickly spoke to Josh. "Oh baby, it's so good. I think I really have surpassed myself this time. This was so good." Josh heard his beautiful girlfriend slurping down the phone as she obviously enjoyed what she was eating. He told her that he knew she was a good cook, and he smiled. She really was. Little did he know that his beautiful 22-year-old Riley took the phone back from Sophie as she looked back up to him. He couldn't take this anymore. "Josh. Tell me how the contract meeting went," Riley managed to stammer out. He pressed the mute button on the handset. Eyes on his and her boyfriend talking about how the meeting had gone, slowly, almost regretfully. Smiling up at Mr. Charles Riley, who still had that phone to his ear. Josh was still talking to his boss, still. It was a shock. "So, are you going to just sit there?" she asked in an impatient tone. "Yeah," he said after his eyes bulged in disbelief that she had just come out and said that. "No. Actually, I have changed my mind," Sophie said and then stood up. Seeing the disappointment on his face made her smile. Taking the phone off him, she pressed the mute button and heard Josh say, "That was about it, really. Hey honey, I've finished my food now. I'm just going to sit down, then we can carry on talking." She dropped the phone when she did and cried out loudly, "OH." Then she realized that she had dropped the phone. "Sophie. Sophie, are you okay?" came Josh's voice down from the other end. Yes. Yes, that I'm great, she told her boyfriend. What happened? I thought I heard you scream. Josh asked worriedly. I'm good, sweetie, very good. I just landed on something hard again as I sat down. It's okay now though, I feel a lot better. In fact, I'm not even hurt, she said, smiling. You'll have to be more careful, babe, he told her, the worry fading now. He thought he knew what had happened. I will, baby, thank you for caring. Ah, you're so sweet, I love you, baby, Sophie said. Hold on 1 second. She looked at Riley. Placing the receiver against her shoulder, she looked at Riley and said, maybe you could give Josh a promotion now, she said with a smile. She had always found those stories so about women who their guy's boss to get a promotion or for him to keep his job. She smiled at the old guy again. She raised the phone back to her ear. Hey, honey, Sophie said down the phone. Hey baby, what's up? Josh asked. Oh, I just had some thing I had to do, that's all, she replied. The leather sofa softly creaked. What are you up to? She asked him. I'm still at the airport, he answered. Oh. Really, she said. Yeah, he replied. Yeah, she lightly. What did you say, babe? Josh asked. I said, yeah. That sucks, Sophie replied, you know, these tacks. Sophie couldn't hear the rest of what Josh had to say as she placed the receiver against her shoulder again. As soon as I can, baby, Josh replied. What's that noise? Oh, what noise? Sophie asked, hoping Josh would take the moan for her being confused. That creaking sound? Josh asked. Smiling, Sophie realized what Josh could hear. Sophie had a wicked idea. I'm in the bedroom, baby. I just had to when I got on the phone with you, Sophie said. While Riley is in the lounge. Josh said with a little laugh. He knew she loved risk. He is boozy at the moment. He was sitting in the lounge when I last saw him, she answered. And you want to talk to me? Josh asked whilst smiling. Yeah. Sophie moaned. Just for a few minutes though, you can't leave Riley on his own all night. It might look bad on me, Josh said. I won't, she promised. Riley couldn't believe how tonight had turned out. Sophie was said down the phone openly now. Her boyfriend seemed to think she was having fun with him. Oh, yeah. It feels so good. Sophie moaned loudly down the phone. Creak creak creak, the leather sofa. Oh yeah, moaned Sophie. I'll take you back to Mr. Riley, she said to the receiver. Then she handed him the phone. He answered it and told Josh that everything was fine and that he was having a great night. Don't worry, Josh, get back as soon as you can, the balding boss told him. What are you doing? Sophie demanded, outraged. He pressed the mute button. Come here. He said, while Josh was talking about how the plane ride went. That kid would talk about anything. Sophie walked over to him, anger and frustration on her face. He commanded. She had turned her head around and was looking at him, all fury gone now. He pressed the mute button as Sophie spoke. Josh was still talking, the noise in the background had increased. He must be outside waiting for a taxi. He hadn't heard, but he didn't move yet. He had one more idea left to try. As Sophie turned to ask, Riley took the receiver from his ear and pressed the little button that said, loudspeaker, and placed it on the chair to the right of him, opposite the table. The noise from the other end was loud due to the traffic. He could make out Josh's voice just, but he doubted that Josh would hear much of this fest. Oh. Sophie cooed, looking at him, while Josh was talking on the phone, thinking his boss was listening with silent interest, about the promotion that might be in line for him. She must really be impressing him for the boss to offer him a 200% pay rise. He couldn't hear the screams well enough to make them out. He just thought they were background noises from the TV or something. Josh just carried on talking. Josh was still going on about the promotion he had offered him. Stupid, Riley thought, if he listened hard enough and stopped thinking about work for a moment maybe he could hear his girlfriend's, Riley said. Time to talk to your boyfriend. And then I might. Josh carried on, I can hardly hear you baby, is everything okay, said the unknowing boyfriend. Yes baby. Everything is so good. Sophie managed to stammer, finally, and she collapsed onto the coffee table. She sounded asleep. Josh stood still, waiting for a taxi outside of the airport. He wished all the planes would stop flying over his head because he could hardly make out a word Sophie was saying to him. He couldn't quite understand. All he could hear was a lot of noise at the other end and the occasional word. He heard his name a lot, though. He couldn't wait to get back home and see her, he had missed her so much. After about 10 minutes, Sophie finally moved. Well, Miss Harper, I think you entertained me well, Riley said with a stupid grin on his fat face. Glad I could be of some service, Sophie replied Riley. Soph, I can't hear you very well. Josh's voice rang out from the receiver on the table. Sophie reached behind her and picked it up. Hey baby. Everything's cool. I've just been entertaining your boss, Sophie told her boyfriend. She was really good at it too Josh. Riley shouted so Josh could hear. I'm glad you've kept him busy, baby. The traffic must be hell. I'm still waiting for a taxi at the airport. Over an hour now. Josh complained to his girlfriend. Out of the lounge and upstairs towards her and Josh's bedroom as she spoke to her boyfriend on the phone. It's okay baby, I'm sure I can entertain him until you get back, Sophie said with a smile for Riley. Riley's face was a little confused still, but now more pleased. Yeah, I know what you mean. Don't worry baby, I know he's a hard man.to please, but I'm sure I can do it, Sophie told Josh. As Josh was replying to her, shouldn't be too long, Josh was saying, finally, a taxi. Josh exclaimed, I shouldn't be too long now baby, Josh finished as he got into the cab. Phone me when you're almost home, baby, so I know when you'll be back, Sophie said, will do honey. Take care, have fun and I shall see you soon, Josh said, and blew a kiss down the phone to Sophie, I love you. He finished. I love you too, baby. I will, see you soon, Sophie replied, bye, Josh said. Bye, hon, Sophie replied, and as Josh hung up, Sophie threw the receiver onto the bed. Josh was on his way home and the bed constantly squeaked and creaked now. The two lay there a little while until the phone rang and Riley reached over and picked it up. Hello. He said. Hi boss, Josh replied. Hey Josh, you nearly back now? The old man asked. Yeah, about 5 minutes, Josh answered. Okay, we'll see you in a minute then, the boss replied. Okay, bye, Josh answered, and Riley hung the phone up. Looking at Sophie, Riley felt regret, but that wouldn't stop him in the future. He smiled at that thought. A moment later, Sophie was straightening the evening dress after pulling it on, and had just come downstairs with Riley when Josh came in through the front door. She ran over and gave him a big hug and a quick peck on the lips. Hey, baby! She exclaimed with a big smile on her face. Josh hugged her back and smiled, then turned to shake the hand of his boss. The three of them sat down, and Josh and Riley started talking about how well the contract went and how Sophie had entertained Riley all night, that he would even consider Josh for a huge pay rise now, because of the contract, of course. Sophie sat next to Josh, holding onto his arm and smiled at her boyfriend. But when she looked over at Riley, she gave him wicked looks. When Riley was about to leave, Sophie hugged him and gave him a kiss on the cheek. We'll have to do it again sometime soon, she said. Me too, Sophie, and please call me Charles. After tonight I think we are better acquainted, so call me by my first name, he replied with a sly smile. Okay, Charles, Sophie said. And why don't you come up to the office one day? I can show you around. You can even see Josh's new office before I give it to him. But I'll have to make sure you don't disturb his work, he said with a little laugh. Oh, I'm sure I won't, Sophie replied with that slight smile. And with that, the old boss of her boyfriend left. Josh and Sophie went upstairs, however, Josh was too tired. She was actually glad of it. So, she fell fast asleep quickly and dreamt about all the fun she was going to have now. But next time, she needed something more daring, even more kinky. And she was going to get it. To be continued.